I need to say right at the beginning that the Meet the Artist series is sponsored by the Stephen and Heather Mnuchin Foundation. And while I'm on that note, a program to move ahead to Thursday, March 11th, here in this auditorium at 7 o'clock, we will be featuring Eric Fischl. So please come. His painting is on view. You walked right past it probably on the way in. As you all probably know, we are in the midst of 24-hour access. In fact, I should open up my jacket. That's right, I forgot. 24-hour access, 24-hour psycho. To say the least, a unique and unprecedented event here at the Hirshhorn. I guess it's fair to say it's been a long day, but it's been a glorious experience for those of us who have worked here at the Hirshhorn. And this morning, well, let me go back to last night. I think it was last night. I'm sorry, I'm Ned Rifkin. I am the director of the Hirshhorn, and I'm also now the Undersecretary for Art at the Smithsonian, so forgive me if I forgot who I was. So last night, or really this morning at about 3 o'clock or so, maybe 2:30, I went to sleep in my office where people have told me I'm often asleep, and woke up this morning at 7 o'clock to the sound of a bagpiper playing in the galleries. And I have to say, if any of you ever want a wake-up call, this is the way to wake up. It was absolutely incredible. Since 5:30 yesterday and closing today at 5:30 this afternoon will be this program. And one of the things that I have to say, just totally off page here, is that we have learned, and we continue to learn as we do new things, what works, what doesn't, and who we're talking to, who we're doing this for. And you are the people who have made it very clear that you do want and need and really enjoy the kinds of things that this project has been. And by that I mean, when you walk out into a gallery in a major contemporary art museum on the mall of a national capital at 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, and you see hundreds of people talking about art, listening to each other, arguing with each other, and there's been no alcohol and no food. It is quite an amazing thing, and I want to take a moment and first of all thank the sponsors of that event, Barbara and Aaron Levine. Are they here, Barbara and Aaron? Please stand up. You know, great ideas only prosper when great people support them. And that's all I can say about Barbara and Aaron. They not only supported this event of 24 hours, they also supported the exhibition. And without the exhibition, there's no event. Of course, without the artist, there's no exhibition. We'll get to the artist in a minute. Please indulge me for just a moment. I want to also recognize the marathoners. These are the people who committed, registered to do the whole 24 hours. And I won't name them by name, but I really like them, if they can stand up, to please do so. You know, in a real marathon, the last few miles are the hardest. So they're not finished yet, so you got to keep cheering them on. I also want to say thanks to a couple of people that's really important. And I'm already out of order, so I want to thank Tom Dodd, who is with Signal 66. Tom, are you here? Probably not. He played at 3 in the morning, he and his band. He was responsible for all of the music we had out here on the lower level, and it was rocking. It really was. It was quite amazing. And I also want to thank Eric Gravely from Planet Vox, who's right here still working on the video documentation of the 24-hour project. But there are so many others. This morning, after getting up and coming down from the crow's nest up there, the elevator doors opened. It was about 9 o'clock, still about a half an hour left of this unprecedented time we were open. And there, behold, was the Ed Tyler Dance Troupe doing Blind Spot, really an inspired piece that really deals with some of the issues Douglas's work tries to deal with. Blind Spot takes its name from one of his pieces. And it really was just so extraordinary to see, contemporary movement artists really working and performing. It was just an inspiration to all 70 of us who were probably there. But overall, we've had 6,000 people, nearly 6,000 people, since yesterday at 5:30, and we're not even over yet. So I could tell you this has been a tremendous success. Again, sometimes you believe, but then when you see it, you really believe. So thank you all. And I would be very remiss not to recognize the event's organizers. Theresia Bush from our education department has been really a steady and a really important force here. Where are you, Theresia? There you are. And I would say, without doubt, the force of nature that is Kelly Gordon. No relation. Is that you, Kelly?
Thanks, Mom.
Now, most of you probably don't know that Kelly is an ongoing programmer for our film and video media pieces here in the auditorium, but in the last year or so has been made a curator, moving her from education into the curatorial ranks. But this project has been really, well, let me just show you. Let's see, what did I do with it? This is something given out to the marathoners, and I think there were more marathoners than 3 when we started. I got one because I pretended to be one. Although I did sleep here, I did sleep. And in this is a bathing cap for the shower, shower cap for the shower scene, a toothbrush, which you can only imagine what that's for, breath mints for the morning, and then your official bag. This is just one small sample of what Kelly does for the museum and for this project. It's really not just the idea, it's the details where both the devil and Kelly live. Anyway, I really can't say enough about your effort, Kelly, and you've just set a new standard for all of us. Okay, I already talked about that. We had the bagpiper coming in and starting the project. At midnight last night, there was a sort of Pied Piper transition through the exhibition that the Piper led, and it was, again, an unparalleled experience for, I think, everyone here. Today, with the conversation between Carrie Brower and Douglas Gordon, it is really the culmination. And I just want to say very simply that to us here, at the Hirshhorn especially, I think that artists and their voices are of critical importance to represent directly as much as possible. And so we have the Meet the Artist series, which I've already mentioned. Sometimes it's the artist, him or herself, standing here and giving slides and talking about them. But often the artists are more comfortable in conversation. So we have several planned for the future. I won't go into them right now other than Eric Fischel. You might have noticed that I'm so inspired that by Douglas, and I finally figured out, Douglas, what the point really is. Once you get your finger tattooed, it just changes your whole orientation. So, okay, moving along, let me tell you about Douglas Gordon very quickly. He was born in Glasgow, that's in Scotland, in 1966. Some of us remember 1966 very well. The BFA he first received was from the School of Art in Glasgow in 1988. He then went to London to the Slade School of Art and took a master's degree. Since that time, he's had 9 solo exhibitions. I'm not sure how we count these, but 9 is what I'm told. More, okay. 11?
No,
Yeah, oh, okay.
Higher.
And over 50 international group exhibitions. I'm reading your press stuff here, Gordon. It says he's currently in Glasgow and New York, but we know he's right here. He has won the coveted Turner Prize in 1996, the Venice Biennale Premio in 1997. He really ran the table by getting the Hugo Boss Prize from the Guggenheim in 1998, so it's the trifecta. And very recently, I don't know how recently, was named the Florence Stone Fellow in Fine Art at the Edinburgh College of Art in Scotland. So he's become from an emerging artist to the professor, the academician in his native land. This exhibition, Douglas Gordon, was organized by the Museum of Contemporary Art in Los Angeles by our friend Russell Ferguson, who's also a Glaswegian. Do I have that right?
Glaswegian.
Glaswegian. Oh, I knew I had it wrong. And we are, the Hirshhorn is the last on the tour, but the first East Coast venue. 24-Hour Psycho, the piece for which this event is named, was first realized in 1993, is that correct? And is considered one of the works that established Douglas as one of the most important artists of his generation today. The Hirshhorn is proud and very, very pleased to have purchased the work called Play Dead Real Time for our permanent collection, and it is debuted in this exhibition here in this this presentation, although it was debuted technically in the Larry Gagosian Gallery in New York several months ago, really, maybe 6 months ago. So what we're going to do, I think, Kerry can correct me if I'm wrong, is to, after the exhibition, leave Play Dead Real Time on view. Is that right or not?
That's right.
Okay. And so there'll be this residual sense echo of Douglas's work and the exhibition thereafter for some time. I should say that we have co-purchased this, which is the first time we've ever done something like this, with the Museum of Modern Art in Frankfurt. So it's something that we hope to develop in future acquisitions as well, but this is a first for us. Kerry Brower, on your right, first worked with Douglas in an exhibition he organized in 1996. There's some debate about that, which was called Hall of Mirrors, the art and film since 1945. It's a very important exhibition for the first time really looking at the interrelationship of the two media, or two genre. He is our Director of Art and Programs and Chief Curator, and is probably best known up until now for his Ed Ruscha exhibition, which he co-organized with former Chief Curator Neil Ben Ezra, and also did a beautiful show of Tacita Dean's work in our Directions program a couple of years ago now, isn't it? And currently he's working on two major exhibitions and also a Biennale. The first one that will come is actually the Biennale, which is in Gwangju, South Korea. He is the co-artistic director. He is also in the process of working, co-organizing with Judith Zilzer, our former curator of paintings, visual music, and I don't know what the subtitle will be, but it's tracing the origins of non-representation abstraction in the 20th century, the early 20th century, up and through the 60s and some of the manifestations that continued on. So visual music will be opened here in June of 2005, and he's co-organizing with David Elliott, the director of the Mori Museum in Tokyo, a survey exhibition of the work of Hiroshi Sugimoto, which is scheduled right now for February 2006 here. So we're delighted, and by the way, he also installed Douglas's show and has worked very closely with him on this project as well. I guess I just want to finish by saying that we have been very, very blessed by having extraordinary media response. A wonderful review by Roberta Smith in the New York Times, the Washington Post critic, Blake Gopnik, did a lovely job, and that we know that today at 5 o'clock there will be an NPR piece in the All Things Considered program that has been worked on up until a few minutes ago and will air in a few hours, just before our 24 hours close. Before I get, I know they're saying, when is this guy going to get off? But just one thing, this is a list of people who have participated in the 24-hour access, and I feel very obliged and grateful to them and want to thank them. First, I'll start with our bagpiper, Mike Scott, who opened the proceedings. Then we had DJ Sandwich Man, music by Chessie, DJ Debut, The Hypnotics, I better put my finger down, DJ Beat Nito Groove, I think I got Nito of Groove, sorry, music by Rose, DJ Neville Chamberlain, Music by the Phobes. Neville Chamberlain came back. Sounds of Kaleidoscope. DJ Happy Family. Sons of Disobedience. DJ Yellow Fever. Gully Jimson. I mentioned Ed Tyler Dance Troupe. I want to thank also Kristen Heilman of our curatorial staff for giving a tour today at noon. And we will close. Should I say this, Kelly, or shouldn't I? Where are you? We plan to close the proceedings with yet another bagpipe rendition. So, from the man who changed your idea of Trust Me as being a used car salesman's closer, to the man who, he himself, is the divided self, Douglas Gordon. Thank you.
Well, Douglas, thank you for being here. We interrupted his holiday in Miami to fly him in here for this talk. And
I don't know about you guys, but they told me I was coming to watch the Oscars. And somehow this happened.
yeah, we sort of almost overlap with the Oscars. I think in the post this weekend it said that there were two big events for this weekend. One was Douglas Gordon's 24-hour access, and the other was the Oscars. In that order, I think.
It's pretty good.
Anyway, thanks for being here. We thought I have a PowerPoint presentation here which has some images from the exhibition upstairs, and instead of talking sort of, around things, we actually thought we would sort of do a virtual tour of the exhibition, so to speak, and actually kind of talk about it. But I think instead of making this so formal, like some Charlie Rose thing, I think it might be good if I try to bring things out of Douglas, but maybe we can even open this up right away to the audience to ask questions about the work as we're moving forward in the exhibition, so that if you have a question, please raise your hand and I'll try to, or shout out, and I'll try to flag you down there. And so if we could get the projector on and the lights down.
And if anyone doesn't understand what I'm saying, we can have a translator come in.
We have subtitles, Douglas. I also wanted to thank, by the way, Linda Powell and Lynn Yamasaki for helping organize this particular part of the talk with 24-hour access to 24-hour sci-fi. So we'll kind of start at the beginning, Douglas. And, I'd actually like to go to this first image here, which is essentially a picture of the lobby area before you walk into the show. But in a sense, with your show, it becomes part of the exhibition. It's more than just a title wall. And when you come off the escalator upstairs, people notice, or at least some people notice right away, that there's really two ways to go in the Hirshhorn. You can go to the right in the exhibition where it says Douglas Gordon in red letters, or you can move over to the left and go backwards through the exhibition. But again, it's not really backwards. You can really go either direction. It's a perfect space to make a statement. The Hirshhorn's a very strange space in that way, circular and kind of wonderful that way. And, so right from the beginning, your exhibition's a little different from other shows. And in fact, having worked with you on the exhibition, I must say it's a somewhat different kind of relationship than usually happens with an artist. More or less, generally what happens is we decide where to install the work ahead of time. It generally goes in there. If we're moving paintings around, we might move them a little bit, but it's still about the painting being in a museum space. And in this case, I think what was really happening is that you were creating a new work to some degree by doing the installation.
I think that it's probably, I don't know how interesting it is for you, but it's probably important for me to say that when we were planning this exhibition, a lot of people, were saying, "Oh my God, the Hirshhorn, Jesus!" And it's a very difficult space. It's really very grave tones. So I came here with some kind of, cloud over me. I was kind of terrified of what was going to happen. And I have to say that normally when I would install an exhibition, or specifically this exhibition started off in Los Angeles 2 years ago. in, what's it called these days, the Geffen
The
building.
Geffen Contemporary.
Which is an old, I suppose, a warehouse space and not an orthodox museum space like this. And then we moved the show from a warehouse space into a converted jailhouse stroke court of session in Vancouver, and then down to a kind of radical 1970s building in Mexico City. So to come from these three venues where I tried to disrupt the architecture, finally I arrived in what you could call almost an archetypal, for me as a naive Scotsman, this would be the image of the archetypal museum. This would be the image that I carried with me from, say, watching, I'm trying to remember the name of the filmmaker. You remember Angie Dickinson walking around a museum just before she's going to be murdered by Michael Caine in an elevator. And this was the type of space
This is Brian De Palma.
It's a Brian De Palma. What's it called?
Dress to Kill.
Dress to Kill. Free beer for that man. So this was, this was almost the exemplification of my idea of a museum. And being from the background that I'm from and coming through the art education that I came through, which was to resist the orthodox, it was very tempted to come in here and try to break up the architecture and intervene in some way. After months of attrition, I realized that this wasn't going to be possible, and for the first time in my life, it feels like I kind of acquiesced to the institution. Please don't tell anyone else that I said that. But in a way, to kind of roll with it allowed something else to happen. So rather than try to break up the architecture, of course it was staring me in the face that every time I've gone into another space, I tried to build a labyrinth that people could find themselves in a place that they didn't expect to be, where they might get lost, or where they might actually not see something in the exhibition. I always liked this idea that you could go to a bar with your friends and say, what did you think about that thing? And you go, I didn't see it. So you'd have to go back. This is a very naive idea, but with the Hirshhorn, obviously, suddenly I found myself walking round and round the building and realised I'd maybe done about 20 laps before I kind of, wait a minute, I've seen this before. So by acquiescing to the architecture, it was, it was almost like a gift horse, and you don't look that in the mouth, so it kind of worked out pretty well for me. Yeah. It's like the snake, the image of the snake eating its own tail. Yeah. Something like that.
Well, one of the things that's very interesting about your work is this idea of mirror images and being able to go several different directions at once, back and forth kind of thing. I'd actually like to talk about a work in the show. This happens to be one of my favorite works of yours, and it's one of your earliest pieces as well.
Almost didn't make it into the show.
Is that right?
Absolutely. Well, no, yeah, you didn't know that, did you?
Yeah. Well, you're seeing an image here of sort of a friend of ours, I guess, Lars Thorwald. And this, of course, is Raymond Burr in Hitchcock's film Rear Window. And in 1993, Douglas was involved in sending letters as a kind of performative type of art to people that he knew. One of those letters, in fact, you sent to Mr. Lars Thorwald in New York City. I was wondering if you could talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, as Kerry says, since 1990, 1991, I think, I had been studying in London. I had moved back to Glasgow, which at that time was felt quite a peripheral place for an artist to be working. It's not the same case these days. But one of the first exhibitions that this is a bit much. One of the first exhibitions that I was involved in when I finished my graduate studies was an exhibition in France. I couldn't go there. I didn't want to send anything to there So I sent something from where I happened to be, and that started off a chain of events and a chain of letters and related works, which were about the distribution of ideas and also to try and get art to people when they least expected it. The idea being that over breakfast you probably don't expect a letter to arrive saying, "I believe in miracles," from someone that you think you maybe met once at a bar or a party. So it was really about trying to get an idea into people's heads before they realised it was an artwork, because I still think that a lot of great art can happen before you realise it's an artwork. So around these letters were started in 1990-91, and they stopped last year. While I was doing this work, something just to kind of, tickle my fancy, I decided to send a letter to someone who I knew didn't exist. This piece is called A Souvenir of Non-Existence. So, I'm probably making this up now, but I think around 92, 93, I was involved in a soccer clash. And I had my leg in plaster and I couldn't go out of the house very much. And I spent a lot of time watching TV. Can you smell the bullshit from it? So I'm watching TV a lot, and I spent a lot of time watching Rear Window. And the more I watched Rear Window, I realised that actually the apartment that Jimmy Stewart is looking at, where Lars Thorwald has maybe not killed his wife, this apartment, the address of this apartment comes up in the movie, which is unusual. I think doesn't really happen these days. So I watched it, I wrote down his name, I wrote down the address, which is only about 5 or 6 blocks now from where I live. And I sent the letter to Lars Thorwald that James Stewart also sent to Lars Thorwald via Grace Kelly. She wasn't available for me. And knowing that this guy didn't exist, I knew the letter would be returned to me. So I knew I was guaranteed a souvenir of something that was going through a process of fiction. That's what it's all about.
Yeah.
It's a long-winded answer.
Well, one of the things, I'm not sure this is what you had in mind when you actually did the piece. It may be almost the opposite of what I'm going to say, but in some strange way, by sending a letter to a fictional character, somehow it makes that fictional character even more real for me, as if he really exists.
Or it makes me more fictional for me.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. You enter that space, or it enters our space, and suddenly the two things start to become blurred, as if it's a mirror image of itself. And I think this has played itself out, in a lot of your work. But I'm wondering too, this idea of sending letters to people you know or have barely met, and also to a fictional character. It strikes me that you're thinking about these issues all the time. You mentioned that you wanted people to react to a work of art before they knew it was a work of art, which is an interesting idea that doesn't happen very much. And it also strikes me that starts to blur the line, not just between fiction and reality, but between art and life as well, that it starts to become a kind of a blurry line. And I'm wondering, as you work in your various pieces and think about work, do you have a very firm line between your art and your life, or are those two things really mixed up?
This is tricky again. Let's see, there are people in the audience here who know my girlfriend, and I've got to be careful what I say, because she really, my partner is also an artist, and it's very difficult to share your life or even part of your life with somebody who tries to blur the idea of art and life. It must be really boring. So if we had done this interview 5 years ago, I would have said, absolutely, the only line is there's no lines. Now I can't say this for sure. And it's also about, if you say that the art and life, of course they intermix, of course they intermingle. And circumstances in my life have changed to a point where I can't really maybe I can't fantasize as, I really have to be careful what I'm saying here. I can't fantasize as wildly now as I could, let's say, before my son was born. Because at the end of the day, I have to be able to change a diaper in the dark. And it's no use pretending if you can't do it, you know.
Can you do it in 30 seconds, though? Well, we'll move on then. I've done the diapers. I don't want to go back there again. Well, this is another early piece from the same
See,
year.
this I wouldn't do now. Absolutely. I'm way too old for
And you
this.
don't want your son doing this either. This is a work from 1993, Psycho Hitchhiker. I'd like you to talk about it, how this work came about, but I do have a question about this work which I've never asked you, and I'm curious about. Now, Hitchcock has played a big part in some of your works. He's influenced you to some degree, and I think you've used Hitchcock maybe in a slightly different way. We'll get to it with 24-Hour Psycho, but maybe in a slightly different way than you use some of the other films. A lot of the other films are taken out of culture. They're things that exist outside of themselves as almost icons of our culture or metaphors in some way. But with Hitchcock, it seems to me that you spent longer actually watching those films and being a part of it. Now, Psycho Hitchhiker really has nothing to do with Hitchcock, or does it? The word hitch is in it, psycho, just curious.
You know, I'm looking at myself here 10 years ago when I was kind of svelte, and I'm looking at myself now when I'm kind of not. And I'm looking at the shadow I'm casting on the wall here, which is kind of there's definitely a Hitchcock thing going on here. But it's only as you were saying this, when we were talking about the letter that I sent to a character in a movie that I'd seen 15 or 20 years after it was made. And of course, the way that I'm saying that not only do I try and pull the fiction into my real life, I'm inserting my real life into a fiction. This obviously Hitchcock was one of the people that we could all agree did this, that he inserted himself into his movies. Hitchcock, the so-called real character that we recognize as a director, also played a role in his own fiction. And I suppose, honestly, this is a brand new idea for me, that I'm kind of seeing maybe that this is me stepping into a certain frame of 24-Hour Psycho, which is actually outside of the movie. What happened, this piece, I'm more I really never look at this kind of thing. I used to live just beyond the brow of the hill, and it looks like there's an articulated lorry has just hit something behind me. You see where that's strange.
This little shadow right here?
No, here, where the
Oh, yes, over here.
yeah. Maybe that was me leaning against it, I don't know. But the idea, what happened with this...
Your battery is fully charged.
So the idea with this... Please stop me, because the idea with someone asked me to do, I don't know, a journalist said that he wanted a photograph for a newspaper article, and of course I wasn't ready in time, so this is what I did instead.
Yeah.
So rather than a still image from 24-Hour Psycho, I ran down and...
Did anyone stop to pick you up, by the way?
Yeah, but I cannot say who.
Okay, we enter in finally now to the first gallery of the exhibition.
Okay, this is where it gets serious.
This gets serious, yes. And you see actually as you come in, there's a finger sort of beckoning you in, and a kind of twitching finger that makes a repetitive motion over and over and over again. And this kind of repetitive approach, this kind of looping of something, of making a gesture over and over and over again, seems to play a part in a number of your pieces. That's a slightly later piece, but even in the early pieces, it plays a big part. And, you know, one can read a lot of things into that. First of all, there's a certain kind of lineage, I suppose, of that in loop projectors coming out of the 1970s in you know, structuralist filmmaking. There's sort of the concept of doing something over and over again in the work of, say, Bruce Nauman, for example. So there's a little bit of a history of it. Although, in terms of your work, it seems like you're doing it in a slightly more narrative way. And I was wondering if you could talk about that a little bit. Talk about the beckoning finger bringing you into the exhibition.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, the beckoning finger. Well, it's called, the title of the piece is Scratch Hither, which is obviously two titles that kind of collided, lost two other words and came together to make something else. So well, obviously there are things implied in the title that maybe imbue the work with a certain way to be read. I'm being extremely ambiguous here, but I have to be. But the fact that when you say that things are looping, I don't ever think of things being made to be looped. I just think of them as being relentlessly ongoing. Yeah. And I don't really know. I'm fascinated by the idea that something is relentless. And I'm still trying to figure out why I would be interested in something like that. I mean, when I was a kid and when I was, going through, school when you're a child seemed relentless, and going to church seemed relentless. And I was brought up in a religious background where the idea was that if once Armageddon would come, that you would have an everlasting life, which is the most tyrannical idea I can imagine. So I always kind of wanted things to stop. I always kind of liked the idea that I could go to a soccer game and it's a finite amount of time, and I liked the movies because they were finite. Therefore, in my work, I wanted something not infinite, because that would sound a little bit too precocious, but just this relentlessly never-ending thing that the marathon people have experienced, kind of thing. But the great thing about it for me is that I don't have to be I was going to say the victim, but I don't have to be subject to the relentlessness of the work. But then again, no one has to be subject to it, because the great thing is you can walk away, and that's one of the things that I think is different in the way that art doesn't tell you to stand this long in front of a painting, this long in front of a video, whereas a lot of other forms of art are so time-based that they have a beginning and an end. And what I'm interested in is no beginning and no end.
Yeah. Let me ask you a question in regards to that. I was reading somewhere in one of the interviews with you, there was a bit of a discussion, I think, with Jan de Bout at the Van Abbe Museum. Very interesting subject. It came up about entertainment. And I think he had brought up this notion that your work had something to do with entertainment, which I think you objected to some degree. And something was said in the interview, which was very interesting. I think you said it. You said that entertainment basically underscored your expectations. It gave you what you wanted. It gave you what you expected. Whereas art tended to give you the unexpected.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back. I suppose it goes back to that idea where, my desire to send art or to introduce art to people when they least expect it is because that's what I want. You always give what you want to get if you're a good person or something. And for me, entertainment, everyone has as soon as you use the word entertainment, whether it's subconsciously or extremely consciously, you have an idea of how high that bar is before, if you don't get over the bar, you're not entertained. It's something that happens. But entertainment seems to have part of the meaning of entertainment is a level that you know when you've reached it, and when it goes beyond entertainment, it's great entertainment. And if we just take the words out of how we expect to look at art or appreciate anything, then it could be appreciated really on its own merits and within its own time frame. And you can use a very private vocabulary to describe how you feel about something. You know, if it's entertainment, it implies that you have to be able to retell a joke that's extremely funny or something like that to me. When you had the slide up there of,
I'm sorry, what did you...
that's fine. Punishment, this punishment exercise in Gothic, you know, again, is this idea of repetition. Punishment exercise, I don't know if it's the same for people here, but that's what you had to do in school if you were a naughty kid in Glasgow. You know, we get whipped in the butt and we got spanked on the hand, but the worst thing was to get the punishment exercise.
No.
That's when you had to repeat, you know, line after line after line, the relentless punishment thing.
Okay.
See, it's gotten very serious.
It's dark. By the way, I wanted to thank someone for doing this PowerPoint presentation for me, and that's Rachel Coker, who did a fantastic job with this, and I could never have gotten it done without her, so thanks, Rachel. The punishment exercises actually came out, there's a series of them, and they actually came out of an accident that you had in which you fell and hit your head.
So they say.
Got this little bit of Harry Potter look to you, I think.
Yeah, I timed it perfectly for the release of the first one.
And so you were doing a show somewhere, I think, when you decided to actually photograph yourself. I've noticed in sort of going through your biography that a lot of your pieces get done while you're away doing a show somewhere. I'll be curious to see what happened while you were doing this one here.
Me too.
But and I don't mean this facetiously at all, but it seems to me that some of the works that you do, perhaps punishment exercises, perhaps photographing your hotel room, I don't know, in Paris, or some of the videotapes that you've done, come out of this moment when you're away from everything else, you're in a hotel room, and maybe you're a little bored, actually. There's a certain amount of boredom involved with these things. There certainly has been for other artists, I think, when they've worked in these things. And I'm just curious if you can tell me, what sparked you to do this? You had this scar on your head, and suddenly...
There's a lot of things that you've just said that are important. The best work that I did ever when I was bored is going to come up later.
Oh.
This one came out of a situation. I did have an accident somewhere, and I still don't know what happened. But I woke up in the morning. Honest to God, this is the only truth I'll ever speak in this talking.
Trust me.
I woke up in the morning and I'd obviously fallen somewhere, or someone had made me fall. I really don't know. And I woke up with this, well, it was a lot worse than that image. And as this, all the swelling and the blood and all this, when that was cleaned away and the swelling went down, I got left with this crazy Harry Potter thing. And it was just, maybe I should backtrack a little bit and say that when I was a student in Glasgow, I did 4 years at Glasgow School of Art, and the kind of education that I had there, which was very pragmatic and determined on the one hand, was also really focusing on trying to allow young artists to develop a personal iconography, to work with an idea of biography or autobiography as a way to just develop your communication skills, which I obviously didn't develop very well since I'm stumbling all the time. So I went from a school of, say, 4 years of this, not necessarily introspective, but, as I say, autobiographical ideas. And I went from there to do my graduate studies in London between 1988 and 1990 at University College in London. And they had an entirely different program. It was much more theoretically based. a lot to do with the post-structural theory, especially with film and photography, which was very interesting and completely was like, well, it was like a sledgehammer on the last 4 years, because it became almost impossible to think that anything that you would do should relate to your life, because why would anyone be interested? And more importantly, why would you be interested in using your experience to communicate anything to anyone else? It was a very cynical period. And then when I left London in, say, 1990, so between 1990 and 93, when I made 24 Hour Psycho, it was really, I probably tried to make some kind of a synthesis between these two ways of thinking, because they seemed to be antithetical when I was going through the education, but they became, it did become possible in some senses to be able to be critical on the one hand, and also to use the works, maybe not as a cathartic exercise in the way that that some people might be, but it also allowed me to make something that might actually be more important to me in 15 years' time than it would be at the present. So Monday morning I wake up in Brooklyn, I have my face all smashed up, and I think, why not? Let's make some work out of this. And maybe it will be important 15 years later.
Now, each one has a different title, is that right?
Yeah, it kind of became important about 3 months later when I got that good idea. Because I had to make a piece for an exhibition in Paris, and this was the most recent thing that I'd produced. The show in Paris lasted for, I think, 123 days. So we showed this photograph, and every day they changed the title of it. So again, this, I still have this kind of fantasy idea that someone might have mentioned it in a newspaper article with one title, and then someone else would see it with a different title. So the more possibility for failure, or not failure, but the more possibility that you could set up for lack of clarity, the better.
Okay. We're doing that here today.
Absolutely, yeah.
I'd like to talk about this piece. I don't have a good slide of it here, but there's a piece up in the corner of the room over here, which is called "Close Your Eyes, Open Your Mouth." That's not the name of it.
We've all tried it. We've all tried it, I think.
Yeah, and it's actually a few words on the nature of relationships. And I wanted to point that piece out, not so much so we have to talk about that piece, but I wanted to get into this notion of text and words, and also your interest in literature. Now, if I understand correctly, maybe you can clarify this, at one point you wanted to be a writer. And
still do.
Still do. And so I'm curious to hear more about that, and what happened with that, how you became an artist instead, and now how you actually are writing in terms of, your so-called visual art.
This is going way back now, really. I wanted to be a writer when I didn't study art at school because, being very west coast of Scotland, Protestant, pragmatic, I did sciences at school. But I did sciences and English, and I used to sneak off from doing athletics and go to the art class. So that's how I kind of got into art school. But in the meantime, I'd made my applications to university to go into a creative writing course, and honestly, the reason, on a very blunt answer to your question, my head of English said, don't bother going to university. You'll have a much better time at art school. And he said, if you want to be a writer, what do you think as a 17-year-old is the most important thing to be a good writer? And I said, well, continue reading. He said, okay, so just go to art school and continue reading.
Wow. Which is what you did.
Which is what it's, yeah, well, that's what I claim to have done at art school. But when I was at art school, especially in Glasgow, there was I suppose a Scottish tradition of people using words visually, concrete poetry, obviously. But before I would know the work of people like Lawrence Weiner or Joseph Kossuth or you know, the many other artists that use words. You know, I was very aware of a guy, I don't know if you have anything in the collection here, but he is known some places in America, Ian Hamilton Finlay. And I met Ian a few times when I was a student, and he's a very charismatic older man who uses words in the most dramatic and traumatic of fashions. Not that I agree with everything that he does, or you know, he has a very complicated politic.
Yeah, I know.
But you know, I visited his. He lives on a farm, and he basically converted this farm. You know, for instance, there's a bird table. You know, where pigeons or geese or whatever would fly down onto what's normally a bird table to have their corn snack or whatever. But his bird table is actually a model of the USS something aircraft carrier. So when these birds land on it, etc., etc. So he would use, and there's a beautiful text that goes with this, which certainly wasn't anti-war. But so having seen things like that, I realized that I could kind of straddle both camps in a way. I could be still working visually and try to enjoy the using words in a different way. I mean, for something like this, close your eyes, open your mouth, because of this circular setup that we have here, if you come into this room as the first room, the first thing you see usually is close your eyes. And if you choose to go around the exhibition the other way, the first thing you see is open your mouth. And again, I kind of like the idea that somebody said, yeah, did you see that open your mouth thing? And the other person says, no, it was close your eyes. So it's a kind of a simple difference, but it's simple enough to get you into some trouble.
Well, maybe if we move on to this piece, we can talk a little further about your interest in literature. There's a number of works that you've done, a lot of works actually, which, I mean, they deal with yourself, they're autobiographical to some degree. They also deal with this sort of notion that evidently comes out of Scottish literature, particularly 19th century literature, although more recent things as well, I think. And it has to do with sort of the divided self. This notion that there are other people inside of us, that we're doppelgangers, we're two different people. And that seems to come out of literature as much as it does other things, and literature then takes you to the cinema. This piece in particular, of course, is a dramatic example of it. I was joking one day and saying you use Scotch tape to do this, but it's not Scotch tape, it's a taped Scot.
I should write this one down for future. The most shocking thing for me is if I stood on the other side of it now, it's like, my God, this is what... It says Monster 1996, but this must have been earlier. Really, it must
be 86.
Well, I have some hair as well, so... as Kerry's saying, that I had, you know, I was brought up on a diet of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And when that wasn't available, when you put on the TV, it was Alfred Hitchcock or the Hammer House of Horror. Then I'd go to church, and then my father played the bagpipes. It was a kind of a hellish background. It was tough. And one of the ways we used to entertain ourselves as children was to tape up your sister's face with sellotape. And she would do mine as well. So this is just a child's game. I think a lot of people, I mean, I won't ask for a show of hands who's actually done this, but I'm sure a lot of people recognize the fun with which this is intended.
All right. Well, we get to the piece that actually sort of, I guess you kind of breakout piece to some degree anyway, and a piece that's been written about an awful lot, and that's 24 Hours Psycho. And, you know, this is an example of the way that you use cinema, the way that you've used it as a kind of artifact from culture and done something different with it. When we go to the cinema, we're usually sucked into it. We're sucked into the narrative. We flow along with it. We suspend our disbelief and we actually move into the frame and move around in it in some sense. But here, by doing two things, really, by slowing it down to the point where it lasts for 24 hours, where you've almost, but not quite, removed that narrative flow out of things. And then secondly, because you've actually reframed it in a sense, reframed Psycho, you've moved it into the center of the room. It now no longer is a space that you can enter and walk into, that limitless space of the cinema screen, because there's nothing on the other side of it. There's no space on the other side. It's as thin as some light, in a sense. It becomes something else. It becomes an object almost hermetically sealed in a gallery space. And I'd like for you to talk a little about the work. Maybe you could begin by saying how this work came about, because I know there's a little bit of a story behind that, which is interesting.
Just while I can remember the point, I don't really agree with the idea that when you go into a cinema, there's nothing behind the screen. I think especially as a child, and obviously a lot of this work, I'm relentlessly telling the same story, which is that a lot of these things are, I suppose, mulling over certain memories that I've had from childhood. One of which being that the space behind the cinema screen for a child is vast and absolutely not empty. It's full of every potential fantasy that you could want.
No, but what I meant is that in a real cinema, you can get lost in it. You can move as far and deep into that fiction as you want to. But in this piece, you can move around it.
Well, in a way, I kind of wanted to, I suppose, deconstruct a little bit of the magic of cinema and just, show people that, hey, a screen is, so thin, but at the same time that when you walk around the other side of the screen, it's just as magical to see that the image, somehow or other, my God, this is actually visible on the other side, but it's reversed. Why does my shadow appear on one side and not on the other? These are questions that are very obviously answered, but you see that the way that people, well, I've seen over the years, the way that people behave in front of this work is a lot, it's akin to the way that well, there's not a big difference between the way a child behaves and an adult, because people are waving in front of it on one side and absolutely amazed that they have no shadow on the other side. It's very simple. But, everyone, I think, has a little vampire fantasy that they don't cast a shadow. And so you're kind of always playing with, I like to think of myself as a normal human being with very normal fantasies, so I think they're shared. So my vampire fantasies are all in this work. So on the one hand, for sure, it was about the idea of deconstructing cinema and to be honest about the magic of the cinema. It's fake magic, but it's still magic. And that, yes, on paper, you could say that 24-Hour Psycho would be a very classical, what's now become a classical way to deconstruct a narrative and make some kind of truth out of it. If you want to find the truth in something, let's take it piece by piece and put it all back together in forensic, with the detail of a forensic scientist, and this way we can find the truth. However, when you stand in front of this thing slowly unfolding, piece by piece, after 5 minutes, you've kind of lost track of where the narrative started. And I like this idea that you could take almost a scientific method and end up lost in a labyrinth of multiple meaning and conflicting meaning, and that you have to acknowledge your own forgetfulness.
When you were in London, going to the Slade, I think, I've heard, I don't know if it's true, but that you spent as much time in the cinema as you did in the studio.
That's what I told them, yeah. The thing, when during this period when I was reading a lot, or maybe not so much, but I was reading some film theory, I would go to the cinema a lot, really to kind of challenge my own idea of pleasure, in a way. because I found that I was going to the cinema watching, especially, I really was into westerns a lot in those days. And, you know, I would go and see a John Ford movie, and I couldn't get into the fantasy of the West because I knew how many crew it had taken to make that shot. I knew that the location wasn't accurate. I'd just read John Wayne's biography. These are all very difficult things to get over in terms of trying to find some pleasure. So I did spend a lot of time in cinema, but it was really a challenge to try and make something good out of it. During that period, you'll find that a lot of artists, especially, watch out for this with the artist series, how artists try and backdate their work. Psycho 1993, this work started in '89 when I went home from the Slade. I was back in Scotland, and it was around Christmas time, and maybe 2 o'clock in the morning. You know, all the bars are closed. I didn't want to phone up friends. I wasn't asleep, I wasn't really awake. So that kind of in-between time just happened that I was sleeping in my brother's bedroom. He had a VHS copy of Psycho. And I probably dozed off at some points and rewound the movie, watched different parts of it again. And I saw something that I couldn't quite believe I had seen. I rewound it, watched it in slow motion, discovered that this was a really interesting thing. I mean, come on, I was 26 years old, I should have known it before, but I watched it again and again, and then I just watched as much of the movie as possible until about 6 o'clock in the morning.